I think I didn't do anything wrong, just kept my boss happy so my team would keep our jobs. Then a courier arrived with a folder that felt heavy like a brick. Inside were legal papers with my name spelled perfectly and a list of dates I thought only I remembered. My boss Gareth was only trying to be supportive at the gala, and I was just showing him respect in return. Daniel, my husband, acted like the whole world had ended when he saw us standing close, as if 1 second of attention meant betrayal. The truth is, I worked hard for years in that office, and Gareth finally saw my value. If his hand lingered near me, that was not my fault. Daniel should have been proud that his wife was admired, but instead he looked wounded, like a child. The next morning, he asked questions that sounded more like accusations, and I told him he must have seen it from the wrong angle. I said he was embarrassed by his own insecurity, not by me. I made him breakfast to soften the mood, but he barely ate, just watched me. At work, Gareth smiled like nothing had happened and dropped a stack of files on my desk with a wink. That wink meant I was trusted, and I told myself it was about the project, not the person. When Daniel sent a long message later that night asking where I was, I answered short, saying I was busy with paperwork. He accused me of ignoring him, and I told him I needed space for my mental health. I repeated that phrase again and again until it sounded like truth, even to me. My sister Cara said I was being brave, that men can't handle a woman who is wanted by powerful people. My parents told me to focus on my career and let Daniel sulk if he wanted. Only his mother Marta looked at me with suspicion, like she knew the story didn't add up. I brushed it off and laughed louder whenever I could, because I would not let one man's jealousy ruin the respect I was finally getting. The night of the gala was supposed to be magical, at least for me. I wore a silver dress that clung just enough to remind everyone I still had a figure worth noticing. And Daniel stood at my side in his same grey suit, the one I had begged him to replace for years. We entered the ballroom together, but I could already feel his hesitation. The chandeliers shone over the tables, music from a string quartet floated through the air, and Gareth, my boss, waved at me from across the room like I was the most important guest there. Daniel's hand tightened on mine, but I pulled away quickly, saying I needed to greet colleagues. I told myself this was about networking, about proving my place in the company. Gareth reached me in seconds and smiled in a way that drew everyone's attention. He asked how the HR team was holding up under the new software rollout, and I answered, with a practiced confidence, letting the group see that he relied on me. I knew Daniel was watching from a distance, and part of me wanted him to see it. He needed to understand that his steady little job as an engineer was nothing compared to the influence Gareth had over me and my career. When Gareth touched my arm to guide me closer to the table, I didn't move away. Why should I? It was respect, not romance, and everyone could see we were professionals. Daniel's expression hardened, but I laughed extra loud so no one would notice his sulking. After dinner, when the champagne started flowing, Gareth suggested we step into the hallway to talk over a proposal for restructuring. I followed, and he leaned close, lowering his voice, saying how essential I was to him. His hand brushed against my waist, then slipped lower under the cover of my coat. For a moment I froze, but then I told myself it didn't matter. It was a second, nothing more, and if anyone saw, they would think he was steadying me. I caught Daniel out of the corner of my eye, standing only a few steps away. His eyes went wide, but I quickly laughed and adjusted my dress like nothing had happened. When he walked toward me, I told him he must be mistaken, that Gareth was only keeping me from tripping on the long hem. He didn't answer, just clenched his jaw. Gareth, smooth as ever, started talking loudly about the New Year's strategy, making it sound like everything was business. A photographer's flash went off right then, catching all three of us in the frame. I pretended not to notice, but inside I wondered what the camera had caught. Back inside the ballroom, Daniel kept his silence, which irritated me even more than his questions. I tried to draw him into conversations, but he only nodded, and my colleagues gave me sympathetic glances, as if I had brought a wet blanket as a date. Cara, my sister, who had managed to tag along as my guest's guest, leaned over and whispered that Daniel looked like he was about to cry. She posted a picture of me with Gareth, captioning it, "Boss energy," and ignored Daniel completely. My parents, who had been invited by chance through a family connection, said later that Daniel needed to loosen up and be happy for me. It was so clear that everyone else saw me as glowing, while he made himself small. I felt proud in that moment, even as I sensed the storm brewing in him. On the ride home, Daniel finally asked if Gareth had touched me. I told him not to embarrass himself, that he was inventing things out of jealousy. I reminded him how important Gareth was to my career, and that if he kept acting like a jealous teenager, people would start questioning his stability, not mine. He didn't argue, just stared out the window with that same wounded look I hated. I thought silence meant victory, that I had convinced him. But when we got home, I noticed he didn't change into his pajamas or settle in with his usual book. He sat at the desk and opened the laptop, typing something I couldn't see. I teased him about working late, but he didn't answer. I felt irritation rise, so I told him again that he had imagined the whole scene. I said his angle must have made Gareth's hand look lower than it was, and if he really loved me, he wouldn't question me. I kissed his cheek quickly, but he didn't react. I went to bed telling myself I was in control. Still, I could hear the sound of the keyboard long past midnight, and I wondered what exactly he was writing. The next morning, I decided the best way to deal with Daniel's questions was to smother them in normal routine. I woke earlier than usual, made pancakes, and set the table like it was a holiday. When he came down, he looked tired, his eyes red like he hadn't slept. He asked me quietly if I wanted to talk about what happened in the hallway. I laughed it off and said he must have been standing at a strange angle, that nothing happened at all. I added that he was embarrassing me by clinging to an illusion. He just stared at the pancakes, not eating, and that silence made me snap. I told him that if he kept up with this negativity, he would ruin our family mornings, and Julian might pick up on his bad mood. Bringing up our son always worked, because Daniel never wanted conflict in front of him. So Daniel dropped the subject, but I could feel his suspicion still sitting at the table with us. At work that day, Gareth walked into the HR pod like nothing had happened. He dropped a stack of files on my desk, smiled, and told me he trusted me with the new reorganization project. Then later, around 9 at night, when I was still online, he sent a message with a wink emoji at the end. I told myself it was harmless, that maybe he added it by mistake, but a part of me felt powerful reading it. Daniel, of course, noticed me typing and asked what was so important at that hour. I told him I was doing paperwork, that I had to focus, and that he shouldn't disturb me. He said I was ignoring him, so I snapped that I needed space for my mental health. I repeated that line again and again until it sounded like truth. My sister Cara backed me up when I told her later. She said I was being strong, that insecure men can't handle women who are wanted by powerful people. My parents also supported me, telling me to focus on my career and let Daniel sulk. Only Marta, his mother, called me and asked if Julian could stay with her that weekend because he seemed tired at school. I knew what she was implying, that Daniel had told her something, but I acted cheerful and agreed. When Daniel asked me for copies of the last 3 months' bank statements, I tried to laugh it off. He said he just wanted to look over things, but the way he asked felt sharp, like he was testing me. Later, I noticed he cancelled 2 of our shared subscriptions, things we had always used together. He didn't even tell me. I just found out when I tried to log in. I accused him of being petty, and he only replied that he was simplifying expenses. That night, while he showered, I glanced at his laptop and saw a new folder on the desktop labeled Counsel. My heart raced, but I forced myself to believe it was work-related. I asked him later what he had been working on, and he said nothing, just projects. His calm voice made me uneasy. I tried to spin it, saying he was paranoid and making mountains out of molehills, but I couldn't shake the image of that folder. To everyone else, I painted the story as Daniel being controlling. I told Kara he was questioning me over nothing. I told my parents he was trying to sabotage my career. To his mother, I acted offended that she thought I was unstable. But the truth was, I needed to keep the narrative under my control, because if people believed Daniel's version, I would look like the liar. So I kept smiling at work, laughing at home, and telling myself that he was the one falling apart, not me. Still, I couldn't ignore that he was watching me closer now, moving quietly, and saving things I didn't even know were there. I decided the only way to turn things around was to make Daniel look small in front of others. If everyone saw him as fragile and humorless, then his suspicions about Gareth would sound like nonsense. So when our friends invited us to dinner at the neighborhood cafe, I dressed in my brightest red blouse and walked in like nothing was wrong. Daniel followed, quiet as always, and I could see already how the contrast worked in my favor. While everyone laughed over drinks, I told a story about how Daniel once thought a coat hem was some kind of scandal at the gala. I said he nearly fainted because Gareth leaned too close. People laughed, and I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the sound. Daniel just sat there, not defending himself. That silence was better than any proof. I told myself it showed he had no argument. When Eloise, my college friend, repeated the joke a little louder, the whole table roared, and Daniel only looked down at his plate. I whispered that he needed to lighten up, but he gave no answer. Later, Cara posted a reel about small men blocking big energy, and I knew it was about him. I told her to keep it vague, but I loved the sting of it. At work, Gareth called me into a conference room after hours. He said he wanted to mentor me, to prepare me for a bigger role. He spoke about restructuring and asked me to come to dinner so we could review plans in peace. I agreed without hesitation, because that dinner was my chance to move up. Daniel, of course, noticed when I dressed up that evening, and he asked why I was going out so late. I told him it was a work thing, and he should stop asking questions. He only nodded, but his calm expression unsettled me. During the dinner, Gareth ordered the best wine and told me he valued me more than most of his team. I told myself it was about work, nothing more. When the plates were cleared, he suggested we go upstairs to a suite he had booked, just to review the org chart without interruptions. I hesitated for a moment, but then reminded myself of the promotion, the influence, the security, so I followed him. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed a small camera above the door blinking red. For a second, I wondered if it caught us together, but I brushed it off, convincing myself no one would ever look at the footage. Inside the suite, Gareth spread papers across the desk and leaned close again. I told myself it was business, even as my pulse quickened. Meanwhile, Daniel's silence grew colder at home. He stopped attending cafe meetups and didn't answer friends' messages. People began to say he was acting guilty, as if he had something to hide. I let them think that. It made me look like the strong one. Still, I noticed changes in him. He collected receipts, he kept his phone locked, and once I saw him slip a notebook into his bag before heading out. I asked what it was, and he said it was just for work notes. I laughed and told him he was getting boring, but his steady look made me uneasy. I tried again to paint him as insecure to my family. I told my mother he had become controlling, and she told me to stay patient. I told Cara he might be losing his mind, and she encouraged me to keep standing tall. Marta, though, said nothing. She just looked at me with quiet eyes, as if she knew exactly what I was doing. I brushed it off, but something in me felt rattled. Even so, I kept telling myself I was in control, that everyone believed my version. And as long as Daniel stayed silent, I could twist that silence into proof that he was wrong. But deep down, I felt a storm gathering, and I didn't know when it would break. By the time the photo from the gala surfaced in our office Slack, I thought I had buried the whole thing. But there it was, watermarked and sharp, Gareth leaning too close in the hallway, me smiling, and Daniel's figure blurred in the background. The chatter in the HR pod rose instantly, and before I could control it, Priya from legal sent a company-wide reminder about anti-fraternization policy. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face calm, telling coworkers it was just bad angle magic. When Daniel came home that night, he said nothing about dinner, only that he had seen the photo too. I snapped at him, accusing him of leaking it, of trying to ruin my career. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just asked me to stop shouting because Julian was asleep. That calmness unnerved me more than any fight could. I told my parents that Daniel was trying to sabotage me, to pull me down out of jealousy. My mother told me to act gracious, to keep private matters private, but my father just said Daniel needed to stop being insecure. Cara, of course, doubled down, posting another reel about fragile men who can't handle powerful women. At the weekend cookout for Julian's birthday at Marta's house, I decided to play perfect mother. I arrived late, carrying a large wrapped gift, joking that Daniel had probably scheduled the candles by the minute. People laughed awkwardly, but Daniel stayed quiet, kneeling with Julian and making sure every kid got cake. Marta watched me carefully, her eyes sharp. I tried to joke again, saying Daniel was acting like the schedule police, but no one laughed. Kara whispered that the whole thing was awkward and that Marta was trying to turn Julian against me. I shrugged and pretended not to care, but inside I felt heat rise in my chest. During the cake cutting, when all eyes were on Julian, a man in a plain jacket walked up the sidewalk. He held a thick envelope and asked loudly for me by full name. Marta stepped in front of the children quickly, asking him to wait until after the candles, but the damage was done. Everyone stared. I took the envelope with shaking hands, and Daniel said nothing, not even looking at me, just steady breathing like he had been waiting for this moment. Inside the envelope were legal papers, full of dates and notes that I had thought no one else had noticed. I stuffed it back quickly, claiming it must be a mistake, but Marta's frown deepened, and even Cara went silent. Later that night, I confronted Daniel, demanding to know what he had done. He said calmly that it was simply documentation, nothing more. I accused him of weaponizing paperwork, of making me look like a villain, but he didn't respond. Instead, he gathered Julian's school forms and placed them in a neat stack on the counter. My parents called me, telling me to be careful, that lawyers were too extreme, but I told them Daniel was trying to steal my child. They promised to support me, but their voices sounded uncertain. I knew the story was slipping from my hands, and that made me furious. Still, I told myself I could fix it. I just needed to convince everyone that Daniel was the insecure one, that I was the real victim. But the weight of the envelope in my bag told me the storm was here, and this time I couldn't laugh it away. When I opened the papers inside that thick envelope, I realized Daniel had been building his case for weeks, maybe months. The pages listed dates, receipts, even screenshots of messages I thought were private. My stomach flipped, but I forced myself to believe I could still turn this around. I told myself Daniel was cruel for dragging lawyers into our marriage, that no judge would ever side with a man over a mother. That morning, he told me calmly that a lawyer named Alyssa Chen would be contacting me soon. He said he wanted things done properly, no fighting in front of Julian. His voice was steady, but it felt like a wall closing in. At work, things got worse. Priya from legal called me into a conference room, laid out badge logs, hotel receipts, and the Slack photo, and asked if I had disclosed a personal relationship with Gareth. I tried to laugh, saying it was all professional, but her eyes stayed flat. She reminded me the company had strict policies, especially for supervisors. Later, an email arrived. Administrative leave pending investigation. My hands shook as I read it in the parking lot. Gareth messaged me, saying we had to keep our distance and that it was a misunderstanding. I realized he was already protecting himself, stepping away while I carried the weight. At home, I told Daniel he was punishing me for being ambitious, that he was destroying our marriage because he couldn't handle my success. He only answered that Julian deserved stability. That word, stability, made me feel small. I tried to gaslight him, saying he was the one acting unstable, hoarding documents and making up stories, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he handed me a printed copy of a temporary parenting schedule that Alyssa had filed with the court. It had Julian's bedtime marked, school pickups assigned, even alternating weeks in the townhouse. I tore the paper in half, shouting that it was cruel to rip a child from his mother's arms. Daniel just picked up another copy from the folder, untouched. Kara called me furious, saying Daniel was hiding behind lawyers. She posted another reel, calling men cowards who weaponize paperwork, but she deleted it within hours. Even she could see it was backfiring. My parents told me to try to talk to Daniel like adults, but when I tried, he simply said everything had to go through counsel. I hated how calm he was, how untouchable. I told my friends he was twisting the story, making me look like a villain, but they stopped replying as quickly. Eloise even sent me a message saying, maybe I should chill until things cooled down. It felt like betrayal. Meanwhile, Marta quietly supported Daniel, printing Julian's school calendars, offering to supervise exchanges. She never gloated, but her silence cut deeper than words. Julian started asking why he had 2 toothbrushes now, one at each house. Daniel told him gently that it was just so he'd be ready wherever he was. I wanted to scream that Daniel was stealing my child's love, but I couldn't, not with Julian watching me. When Priya called me again, she asked if I wanted to provide my side formally. I claimed Gareth had pressured me, that I only went along to protect my team, but she showed me screenshots of my own messages, ones with laughing emojis and after-hours invitations. I said they were jokes, professional banter, but her face didn't change. That night, I accused Daniel of feeding those messages to the company, but he said everything was public record, and I had done it all myself. I hated how rational he sounded, how he used facts instead of emotions. Alyssa filed a motion citing hotel receipts and Slack logs, attaching them neatly with tabs. The hearing was set for Tuesday at 9 a.m. I panicked, telling my parents the system was stacked against women, but even they sounded tired. My mother said I should focus on Julian's needs, not my pride. I slammed the phone down, furious that no one was fully on my side anymore. I kept telling myself Daniel was the one at fault, that his mother had poisoned him, that lawyers had brainwashed him. But deep down, I knew he had simply been patient, watching, waiting, gathering. The power I once held through laughter and spin was slipping. And as I sat in the parking lot, staring at Priya's email and Alyssa's motion notice, I realized I wasn't just fighting Daniel anymore. I was fighting paper, dates, signatures, and proof that couldn't be twisted. I told myself I still had a chance, but the weight in my chest said otherwise. The cliff was in front of me, and Daniel had built it brick by brick. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the family court annex with my head high, but my legs felt like they might give out. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and everything smelled like paper and disinfectant. Daniel was already there, sitting straight in a dark suit, a thick folder at his side. He didn't even look at me. I told myself that meant he was weak, that he couldn't face me, but in truth, it felt like he had already won. Alyssa, his lawyer, greeted me politely, not even with anger, just cold efficiency. My lawyer tried to comfort me, saying judges listened to both sides, but I saw the neat stacks of exhibits on Daniel's table, and my mouth went dry. When the judge entered, everything moved fast. Alyssa spoke clearly, presenting a timeline of my late nights, my bank statements, the hotel receipts, the Slack photo, even Julian's daycare sign-in sheets showing Daniel's consistency. My lawyer objected once or twice, but it didn't matter. The judge kept nodding, writing notes, asking precise questions. When it was my turn, I said Gareth had pressured me, that I was only humoring him to protect my team. I insisted Daniel was punishing me for ambition. I even tried to say the hallway photo was misleading, that the hotel suite was just work talk. The judge asked why I had mocked my husband in public if things were innocent. I stammered that it was just banter, nothing serious. But as the words left my mouth, I could hear how weak they sounded. Marta sat behind Daniel, hands folded, her face calm. Kara sat behind me, glaring at Daniel, whispering that he was destroying our family until the bailiff told her to be quiet. My father squeezed my shoulder, but his hand shook. My mother avoided looking at anyone. When the judge delivered the orders, my chest hollowed out. Temporary joint legal custody, but Julian's school nights would be with Daniel, because he had provided consistent care. I would have every other weekend and alternating holidays. The judge signed a financial restraining order on our joint accounts, blocked me from moving large sums, and included a non-disparagement clause. Neither parent was allowed to insult the other in front of Julian or online. The judge also recommended therapy for Julian, noting the conflict between parents. My throat closed as I listened. I wanted to scream that this was unfair, that I was the mother, that none of this should matter. But Daniel simply nodded, accepted the folder, and looked at no one. Then the company meeting came. At HQ, Priya sat across from me with HR documents. She cited policy breaches, supervisor-subordinate entanglement, reputational risk, undisclosed relationship. Gareth had already resigned, his statement saying he wanted to pursue other opportunities. My demotion letter lay in front of me, reassigning me under a different division, with a warning file in my record. I tried to argue that I had been protecting the team, but Priya only said the logs and messages told another story. My voice cracked when I said Gareth had misled me, but she pointed to my own words, my own emojis, my own calendar entries. Leaving the office that day felt like walking out of a different life. Back at the townhouse, now half empty with Daniel's things gone, I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by silence. Julian's artwork still hung on the fridge, bright stars and rockets taped in uneven rows, but the house felt foreign. I told myself I was still strong, still justified, that Daniel had turned everyone against me with his cold paperwork and careful strategy. But inside, I knew the truth. He had beaten me by being patient, by letting me destroy myself while he documented everything. The judge's words echoed in my head. Further status in 60 days. Everyone stood, papers shuffled. The bailiff opened the door. Daniel left first, steady, with the folder under his arm, never once looking back. And that was the moment I realized I had lost. Not to another woman, not to gossip, but to the quiet man I thought I could humiliate forever. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.